Hey all, this video I'm going to talk about an idea that I don't think others have mentioned or that I've not seen in the community, and it occurred to me as I'm reading these Marvel comics in the library like Galactic Storm that one thing, again, and you're reading this stuff that was decades ago, was what I don't like, and it stands out in a bad way, is when they were making these crossovers, they were basing it on the characters where they were currently in terms of their own book and storyline. And so when a crossover happened, they took what was going on in the current books and put it in the storyline, which would make sense, right? But when you look back on it, it reads badly. In particular, Eric Masterson was a replacement Thor, later became Thunderstrike, but the character never panned out long term. He was interesting for his day, but he never became iconic. He never became something special. And yet, this replacement Thor was in two of the biggest storylines of Marvel back then. He was in the Infinity Gauntlet fighting Thanos, and he was in Operation Galactic Storm. And when you look back on it, not only did the storyline crossover not tell you who this guy was in terms of his origin, how he got that way, etc. The backstory is not explained. I know it because I was following the books back then. But for a new reader, you have no idea. Where is the real Thor? It is not explained. And when they had the crossover between Marvel and DC and they made their own universe in the 90s, you had Superboy versus the Ben Reilly Spider-Man in his Ben Reilly Spider-Man costume, who was later revealed to be the clone, but back then he was supposed to be the real Peter Parker, even though he wasn't. So you had a fake Spider-Man versus Superboy in a very rare Marvel DC crossover. You didn't have Peter Parker, you didn't have the iconic Spider-Man versus Superboy. Just like you didn't have the real Thor versus Thanos. And it makes me think, the real Thor would have been so much more enjoyable in Galactic Storm and in the Infinity Gauntlet than this fake. This replacement. And it makes me think that, back then the editors didn't think about this, about the long-term game of what these crossovers and storylines could mean when you look back on it decades later or years later. I guess one rule I would like to have seen, and maybe it should be established, is if you're going to have a big company crossover, or you're going to have some huge X-Men or huge Avengers event that is building to a 9-part, 12-part, 20-part storyline, if you're going to do this like a Secret Wars, if you're going to build up a big event, make sure, for whatever reason, doesn't matter what, you get the iconic version of the character in their iconic costume for the event. And then once the event is over, you want to go back to your story, the different costume, the replacement hero, fine. But when you're building up to this big event, make sure you have the real Thor in his classic Jack Kirby costume. The real Steve Rogers in his classic Captain America costume. The real Spider-Man in his classic costume. The real Batman in his classic costume with Bruce Wayne. You had the Azrael Batman versus the Punisher. When you look back on it, that just reads bad, okay? Missed opportunities. You had the replacement, well actually not the replacement, yeah. The Kyle Rayner Green Lantern with the Silver Surfer instead of the Hal Jordan iconic Green Lantern with the Silver Surfer for a crossover. It just reads bad when you look back on it to see these characters who are not iconic or different costumes that are not lasting on special crossover events. Things that might not happen ever again or for a long time. And when you look back on it, it just reads bad. I don't know what to call it. I don't know what to think about other than to say what I just said. If you're building up to a special crossover, a special storyline, a big event, make sure all the characters in it, especially the established heroes, the big icons, make sure they have their classic costumes and the proper person under the costume. Not the replacements in any of this. Because it looks bad. It reads bad years later when you look back on it. And I just thought, I'd rather have had the real Thor in that Infinity Gauntlet storyline, for example, So, let me know what you think about this idea, Because they didn't think long term how it would read years later. And I think years later it reads bad to see these replacement elements, these temporary costumes that didn't last in such special crossover events. So that's what I want to say. Thanks for watching, subscribe, and talk to you later.